Hi, what I wanted to talk about right now is an event I've enjoyed over many years, which are air shows. And these are pretty dynamic events that afford you the opportunity to take advantage of a lot of action in the air with, say, a jet fighter, or be able to capture some interesting types of things on the ground where you're able to get up close to the aircraft, see the ground crews, the maintainers, and the pilots themselves. With the ground display, you can leverage wide-angle lenses quite successfully to be able to get a lot of interesting types of shots, whether you like to capture all the aircraft on a hot ramp or those that are on the static display, or if you want to have some of your favorite individual aircraft and the close-ups of different parts of the plane, you can do that without much muss and fuss. Whereas doing the aerial display takes a completely different type of set of skills. And the first thing I want to talk about when you're trying to shoot an aerial display is to make sure that you have enough lens. And what I mean by that is that you have enough focal length with the camera that you have. The minimum I'd strongly urge you to have with you in your bag is a 300 millimeter. Now, the reason for it is that if you're going to shoot something like the hot ramp or the group displays like the Snowbirds or the Blue Angels or the Thunderbirds, you're going to be able to get those quite nicely with a 300 millimeter. Whereas a smaller jet fighter like this versus the larger cargo aircraft, you're going to need something quite long to get them so that you're not ending up with dots in the sky. The other consideration with the camera that you have is to make sure that you're working with your autofocus system to optimize the opportunities of capturing something with motion, especially something like this, which has a low visibility paint scheme. As you can see, there's not a lot of contrast on this airplane. And that's pretty indicative of a lot of the modern jet fighters, as they just don't simply want to be seen. That's their job, is to stay alive and avoid being seen by the bad guys. So you're going to have to work with your autofocus system to really optimize the number of keeper shots that you want out of it. The first thing that you want to do is make sure that your camera is in autofocus continuous mode. If you are using a Nikon camera or a Sony, if you're a Canon user, put it in AI servo. For the Nikon world that I'm very familiar with, I also want to reduce the number of focus points I have that the camera system is going to use. Why am I going to do that? Well, the more that the autofocus processing engine has to do to figure out what I'm trying to shoot, the greater the likelihood something's going to be out of focus, especially if I've got something that's a fast mover, 500-600 miles an hour above the deck. There's not a lot of opportunity for mistakes. So if you go to a single point, or if you go to a group area, or if you go to a dynamic 9-point, that should be more than enough to ensure that you're going to get some very good hit rates on an airplane like this. If you're running into some contrast problems, try to get the focus point in around where the cockpit is, because at least you have enough framing and contrast, because the interior of the cockpits are most likely black for the top view, is that you're going to be getting enough contrast for the computer to work with. Ideally, you're going to be in around here for your focus point. The other key thing is to ensure that you are panning with the camera as the aircraft is coming in. So as the plane is moving along, you're moving your camera at the same time rather than staying static in one spot, so that you're able to allow the autofocus system enough time to capture that airplane in motion. And we're going to talk about one technique in a moment that is common to solving some of these problems, which is back button autofocus. I did mention very briefly about back button autofocus. And what that is that you have, most likely, depending on your camera, a button that will say something to the effect of AF on, which is back button autofocus. And why you want to do that over having the shutter release and the autofocus system working off of one button is simply this. And that is that you want to avoid shooting pictures unnecessarily, and or as you're tracking the subject, I have the back button on, tracking, and I'm going to use my shutter release to ensure I get the shot. So tracking, click, 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 and I'm going to remove my finger and keep moving in the sky, no different than a follow through with a golf swing or with a hockey swing. And the reason for it is you want to have as smooth a motion as possible, especially if you're tracking something like a propeller driven airplane where you're at 1/60th of a second, or even the jets, because if you've got a long lens, your lens is going to want to have a tendency to move up and down, and it does make for a heavy day having a long lens on a camera. So having this tracking technique down is going to ensure that you're going to have a higher number of keeper shots out of your day. All right, so we've covered off autofocus tracking at an air show, but we haven't covered off a very important subject that really needs to be addressed, which is knowing how to use your metering system to capture something in the air. And there are going to be a lot of opportunities for you, especially if you have a great day with a lot of light, that you could end up with a really well exposed airplane and a nice blue sky, or you could end up with a nicely exposed sky and a silhouette of an airplane. And so what we're going to do together is we're going to go outside on a winter's day, and we're going to take this Spitfire Mark I model outside as an example of what you can do. Now you can see this is a sizable model, so it's not just some small little dinky thing that we're trying to do an experiment with. One of the things about it is that because this has got a camouflage pattern that's not a low visibility type like what we had with the Sea Harrier, you're going to be able to see more of the impact of the light and dark. Now, I'm not going to shoot the underside of this airplane simply for the fact that this is an original scheme from the Battle of Britain, which was the white and black, just to make sure that the ground crew didn't shoot at it. So we're going to just use the top of the airplane to show you what's going to go on as far as the visibility. And I'm going to show you specifically what is done with the Nikon camera app run off of a smartphone called SnapBridge. It allows me to use the camera remotely, but also show you the settings. So we're going to go through that right now. One of the things before we continue on I wanted to mention is this target here. And that will allow us the ability to go ahead and understand how much there is as far as an impact of the gray area, which is what your metering system is going to use for exposure versus black and white for high contrast, as well as the fact that there are going to be 3 metering modes that we're going to address. One is a multi-segmented metering system, which is common to all of the cameras that are on the market. Nikon brands it Matrix, where you have 5 points, where you have the 4 corners and a large center area. And then you have center weighted, where it would look into something like this area here. And then you have spot, which would be this smaller target area. Those are going to have impacts on what the camera is going to see for reflected light. So what I'm going to do to start off with is I'm going to use a device called an incident light meter that will read the amount of light coming towards the actual subject before it's reflected back to the camera. Your camera, as well as all camera metering system, use what's called a reflected light metering system, which is as light comes to this particular target, obviously the black absorbs more light than the white does, and the gray is going to absorb less light than the black. So that will have an impact on the exposure coming back, which is why we run into these situations with backlighting that you'll see where the sky is exposed differently than the subject, and as you try to expose more and more for the subject due to the backlighting, you end up with very washed out backgrounds. Now there are some positives to this, and we'll talk about those after we've gone through the shots. All right, we're back from outside and you've been able to see the differences between the three metering modes in the camera, which were the multi-segmented, the center weighted, and the spot metering. And as you can see, when you have something that's front lit, there is a somewhat of an impact with those different metering systems, but there isn't as much of a dramatic impact as it would be in the backlighting situation, especially with the incident meter reading that we put manually into the camera. Now, as you can see, there are some significant challenges that you have with backlighting, and it does have an impact on the image, especially with what you may or may not want as far as an image is concerned. However, there are some positives with backlighting, and you can create a lot of drama with it, especially with the static displays. If you're able to get access to the static display or the hot ramp in the early morning, you can get some nice shots where you have a shadow impact or a silhouette of the airplane of interest, and you can get the sun coming across it, and you can highlight the transparent areas of the plane like the cockpit and so on. However, there's another opportunity, especially with the fast jets, and that is getting water vapor over the lift surfaces. So as the airplane comes in and it starts to perform a high-speed G maneuver, you'll start to see water vapor coming over the aircraft lift surfaces that are nicely highlighted because of the backlighting. You create more drama and impact and contrast. There are some interesting opportunities with backlighting in those scenarios where infrequently, if you can capture it, you start to get a cloud coming across a large part of the wing and the light becomes diffracted, so you get a prism-like rainbow effect going over the airplane, or even some of the vortices coming off the wingtips. So again, it's not always so bad, but it all depends on what you're trying to do with those particular pictures and being cognizant of the opportunities that you have for your photographic endeavor. Anyway, we're going to explore a couple of additional shots that you can see here, and we'll take it from there. Hi, as we wrap up the conversation about an air show, there's some things I want to talk about that are not only photo related, but also just some things that will help you enjoy the day a bit more. One of them is that you're in the middle of a summer event, and make sure that you don't dress for a fashion show, you dress for the heat. The light does swing around throughout the day, and making sure you have a big hat to protect your head and your back of your neck is imperative. Bring sunscreen. As I mentioned, it's a summertime event and you can get cooked. I've seen lots of people that look like regular humans and became candidates for Red Lobster after we were done. Drink. Make sure that you have enough water. If you can bring water with you, great. If not, make sure that you can get it from the vendors. Stay hydrated. It's easy to get lightheaded in the heat, especially near the hot ramp and the concrete or asphalt surfaces of the runways. There's a lot of heat retained, and you can be very surprised how quickly you can get overwhelmed with it. Now on the photographic side, make sure you bring as little gear as you need. A lot of these events are really now security constrained, and before you go, make sure that you check the website to find out what you can and can't bring. Don't be disappointed when they say to you at the gate, you got to open your bag and be checked. If you're going to any events that are on a military base, they can severely restrict what you can bring because of security concerns. And we live in a world of a lot of security concerns. If you have a second camera body, I'd suggest that you bring it with you. And the reason being is you don't want to be changing lenses in the field. These events can be kind of dusty. You want to have one for your super telephoto lens, and you want to have something that might be a medium telephoto or a wide angle lens for the static displays. This way then you're able to capture the action as it moves throughout the day, and you may be able to get something with a group display with a wide angle lens, like a maneuver where they create hearts in the sky. You're going to need a wide angle for that. You're not going to capture that with a super telephoto. Make sure that you have enough batteries with you, depending on your camera model. Some are more battery hungry than others, especially if you're checking the back of the display. And make sure that your kit's clean before you go. You want to avoid being disappointed with a lot of dust. And lastly, make sure you have enough memory cards. The thing about what we've talked about, different techniques with panning and making sure that you're in continuous focus, and the servo mode that you're in for capturing your shots, you want to be in a situation where you're in a continuous frame rate. You don't want to do spray and pray. That's not going to be a success. You want to be able to have enough frames taken throughout the day that as the autofocus system tries to keep up with the subject, that this one shot might be out, but the next one may be absolutely perfect. And that will happen. It doesn't matter the brand name. Obviously, the focus systems are getting better all the time. But the point of it is that you've got something moving at a high rate of speed, and where it is in the air relative to the time that it's captured may have an impact on motion blur as well. Anyway, go out, have fun, enjoy the day, and I hope that these techniques turn out to be of some use to you. Thanks for viewing.